is how I make my strawberry jam. And before I knew it, you know, you were there for 2.5 hours getting the best interviews. It wasn't awkward at all. So all I can say is foodways are really important, particularly when you're doing oral history. And the other great benefit was I was given all sorts of wonderful food products. Oh, the WSA made boulettes, you know? I would go home with all these meatballs, or the French-Canadian version of refrigerator cookies, you know? And so it's really wonderful, the way in which it somehow comes together.
Thanks, Gail. Gary?
Thanks. As a retired academic, I want to say thank you to all three of you. That was just a splendid and stimulating panel, and it reminds me of what I miss about the classroom and about teaching. It was superb. But my question is completely non-academic, because I am retired, and because I do like to cook, and I especially like to eat. So my question is for you, Emily, and I wonder if, from your family tradition, what are your signature dishes? Yeah.
If I'm going to make food for myself to take to school, I'll often make things like chocolate chip cupcakes. That's something that my mama always made, because I can freeze them and take them out one by one. Otherwise they go bad, or I have to feed them all to my 3-year-old. But otherwise, we do waffles as dinner, which is something that my husband hates, but we love. And other than that, a lot of those things I'm not making myself yet because my mom is still there and all of that sort of thing. So I'm not hosting a lot of the big meals. The things that I know that I'll make forever are things like sea pie and meat pie. I don't think I could go a year without that sort of thing. The big hard cookies, the véhicule that we make at Christmas time. Yeah, and just the baked beans, that sort of thing.
Thanks.
I would just echo Gary's comments about that great panel. Question for Alison. The connection between colonialism and food is really, really interesting, and I think, you know, kind of untapped. I'm wondering if you had access to or have found sources of Christian missionaries commenting on food practices that they want to undo. You know, in your essay in Edible Histories, it's a fairly positive exchange relationship, but I'm wondering if, I'm exploring some of this myself in terms of missionaries, you know, going to Africa, for instance, and taking their North American food customs and replacing local foods. And have you found anything like that?
You know, not a lot, and partly because I think I've been looking more at the records of the, like for this, I looked at the Women's Institutes and the Agricultural Society, their own records. I haven't looked at a lot of what the missionaries were saying for that period. I found enough and needed to finish it, and it was done. I'm now going back and looking at missionary records, actually for my postdoc, which was on Aboriginal teachers, to find out what they were saying about hiring Aboriginal teachers. And so I found a few references to food, or actually not to food, to what's being grown. So, you know, I feel like it's one of these instances where, you know, it wasn't considered as important to note what they were cooking. You know, it's really like a sort of, they happened to mention it. And so I picked up all the little bits of them mentioning food and tried to figure out what this means. I'm sure the missionaries must have been concerned with what they were cooking, and it must have been part of the effort to civilize, you know. But I haven't, I'm sure it's there, I just haven't found it yet.
Other questions or comments? I have a quick question for Alison, and it is about women's institutes. In lots of other Indigenous communities, it wasn't women's institutes, but rather homemaker clubs that were sponsored by the federal government, Department of Indian Affairs. So why women's institutes at Six Nations?
Homemakers clubs, weren't they more post-World War II?
Yeah.
Okay, so so my research so far has only gone up to the war, and so there are no, I mean, the women's institutes seem to be pretty big on reserve then. sorry, you're asking me why homemakers clubs aren't there.
Yeah, because women's institutes are provincially organized and the other is federal.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, so far, because I ended around World War II, I have no idea. I don't know what happens afterwards. That's great. Yes?
Could that perhaps be because of the WI starting in St. George, which would be close to Brantford and the Six Nations?
Yeah, you mean why they're there? Yeah, I mean, I think so there's 3 women's institutes on the reserve, and there's only records of one of them survived at the Woodland Cultural Center. I think just sort of randomly they got put there and they were sitting on filing cabinet shelf. They're not cataloged or anything. The librarian just happened to know that they had them. The other 2, there's no records, so I'm only able to find out about them through the Oshuikin one. And so in terms of why did they start and all of that, I have a couple of newspaper articles saying this is the beginning. I think that I know that there were women's institutes surrounding the reserve in Grant County in the early, the first decade of the century, and so I have a feeling that these women saw what was going on and wanted one in their community as well. So yeah, I think that's how they were going.
And that's a really interesting answer, because in the historiography, that's kind of the debate that goes on, were these grassroots things that the community wanted, and so therefore the women on the reserve were saying, we want one too. Or the post-World War II scholarship is showing these are imposed, the homemaker clubs were very much another colonial attempt at assimilation. Yes?
I have a question. This is an exciting panel, and it's exciting to hear people who are starting their careers in the field. I'm going to start with a question for Nadia, but then expand it to the other 2. I'm actually interested in what's coming next in terms of your research. I was on a panel on Wednesday with Brian Cowan, who does work on the coffee houses in Europe. And one of the chapters in our book, What's to Eat, is on chocolate. We've talked about chocolate as the drink in the earlier Canadian foodways. And these drinks function as facilitation mechanisms for conversations, which is partially what you're describing here as well. So I'd be interested to hear what your next project is, and once you've heard that, maybe we can hear from the others as well.
I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with the coffee pot. It wasn't a big part of my dissertation, but it was an observation that kind of developed over time and really towards the end of writing. So I think one of the things I'd like to do is go back and do another round of interviews with people that I have already talked to and talk more about food and drink, and especially look at some of the cookbooks that come out of the community, because in some areas they now are settled enough that there are these sort of publications that have come out. But I'm also interested in the ways that they are using new kinds of ingredients in older recipes that they bring over, and how some of the communities are also sharing recipes. I'm interested in that as well. But broadly, I'm looking for the next research project at veiled women. So I'd like to look more specifically at women in hijab, but also look at women in North America who convert to Islam and then take on the hijab. So look at the kind of complicated range of women we're talking about when we talk about women wearing head coverings.
Like I mentioned, I want to do more on French-Canadian foodways, but I noticed in my paper and by just the reading that I've been doing since then that there's a lot to say, I think, about the changing space of the kitchen, with our kids being more involved and men being more involved, and I think that there's a lot to say there about how our kids learning. The fact that my 2.5-year-old was able to make my cake for me says that she's learning something, and that she maybe can't do it all by herself, but what will it take for her to be able to do it? And my mom can still talk about coming home to us having made pies and cakes while she was off at work and we were just in elementary school. So what is the process? Like, how do we learn really? And at what point do we lose that to gain it again? I think there's a lot to say there.
So I have two answers. One is that my short postdoc at Trent in Canadian Studies and a history of Aboriginal teachers in Southern Ontario. That's that project, and food is not really part of it. But partly because of Emily's paper, and I've done a bit of work before on my own family history and food history, and now with 2 daughters cooking, and we do a lot of cooking and flour mixing as well. My father in my house, and the importance of these traditions, and to be able to starting a young family. Be able to think, what are the traditions? What did my grandmother cook and my mother cook? What are the things I want to make sure that I cook? Like I just hosted Easter dinner the first time, and okay, so I have to do a ham. My mom did a ham, I have to do that as well. And then what to do with leftover ham, because there were only 3 of us eating it, and then it lasted a week. Beans. It's in the freezer to make beans when my mom goes back to town. So anyway, the conference and thinking about food, aside from my own academic work, is making me think about food traditions that matter in my family. Anyway, so thanks, Emily, and thank you all.
Yes?
The discussion brings up a memory that would caution in your research that grandmother always cut the ends off her ham. Cooked, right? And mother would cut the ends off the ham. So I said, why do you cut the ends off the ham? Well, I don't know, that's the way my mother always did it. And so when we talked to grandma, why did you cut the ends off the ham? Because it wouldn't fit in the pot. So you have to be careful what tradition you're in.
Do you have a poem for us?
Could you tell us that with a Scottish root? So, we heard about Nadia's experience of going for coffee and being rushed, and I don't want to rush you, but I'm fairly proud of the fact that we were going to finish on time, or we have a couple minutes to spare here. So I think I'll leave it there and ask you to join me in thanking once again these 3 fine panelists for